All right, we're here with Graham Tuttle, the foot specialist. He's known for his hair and his humor. He's uh, he's impacted me in ways I can't really describe. I've had the honor to spend some time with him, and he really has blown a lot of my paradigms and, um, really helped me to take control of my own life instead of looking for someone else to come help me through it, to step into more leadership roles. And it's taken me probably 6 to 9 months to actually put into action what he's taught me, but I'm extremely excited to bring his wisdom to you guys because when we talk about productivity, Graham, he produces more than most people, and yet he always has high energy and he has fun. Like, that's probably the number one thing I admire about him most is his sense of this is just a game and we're just having fun. So don't take yourself so serious. And yeah, I'm pumped up. Thanks for being here, Graham.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to be had. I have the most bare bones presentation you could possibly imagine. Um, am I able to share screen or is that not a thing?
Yeah, go right ahead.
All right, let me, this, when I say the bare bones, I don't exaggerate, I'm not elaborating or exaggerating. All right, procrastination. Procrastination. So it is interesting in some sense because I do think the competence hierarchy structure that we live in glorifies certain things like productivity. But and I'm sure that many of you discussed the importance of productivity is only as valuable in relation to its directness of whatness, meaning for what? What am I doing? So one thing I think is valuable, and this is something I've been thinking about more frequently. There's a guy named Julian Pinot who you may or may not know. He's in his late 40s, but he's one of those guys that's a more underground strength coach, meaning he's incredibly intelligent and intellectual, and he's like 5 to 10 years ahead of his time in terms of thinking. And yet, because he's not very forward focused on Instagram or social media, most people haven't heard of him, but brilliant guy. Anyways, he helped me shift a few of my thoughts around this, especially when you start looking at the nervous system. But I do think that there's space to understand what procrastination is. So if you'll indulge, we'll go through some of these things. I'm sure these major common content has been discussed in terms of like finding a purpose and thinking bigger. Jordan Peterson does that ad nauseum, which is a beautiful thing, and it's been very meaningful for me. But I think it's valuable to look at the other side of that and see like, well, why are we procrastinating? So first, I think it's important to look at like, well, what is laziness? So, in a sense, procrastination is the, let's say, the downstream externality of laziness, as we would say. And I think until we have an understanding of laziness, then we can't really use it well. So this is one thing that I've been more intentional about in the last few years is speech. I think there's a lot of value in using words deliberately, but also understanding what they mean. And so anytime you find that you're using a word that you're like not 100% sure what it means, where it came from, it's always good to pause and learn and define that, get the etymology of like where the word came from. So, I don't know that about laziness, but in sense, so let me for paraphrase that. There's two ways of figuring something out. You can go and look at the definition and get the etymology and the root word. That's helpful. But oftentimes language changes. So I don't necessarily think of language as a fixed thing as much as an evolving expression of some level of a conscious awareness. Okay. So you can make up words. I was with a buddy getting dinner last night and he walked out and he was talking validify was the word he was using. And it's one of the most dickish thing you could do is confuse or correct somebody in the middle of their sentence when they're using a wrong word. But so I did do it. But he was validate and solidify, but it was validify. So in some sense, who gets to dictate what a word is, that's there. But you can use the use case setting for a word. Like when do you use the word laziness? Who are you referring to? What's the emotional attachment to the word you're describing? So laziness is almost always described when we are talking about someone's inaction or incapacity or inability to do something. So it's generally a conscious decision. So if you look at a handicapped person who can't get upstairs, we're not saying they're lazy. Though depending on your frame of reference, you could say that it's not helpful. But the point is, it's laziness is always kind of a subjective definition. So the first thing it says, like, who's saying you're laziness? And oftentimes it's because we are judging others based off of our own value system. So the incentives and the things that push us aren't always or are rarely what push other people, except for when you get little groups of cute little echo chambers like these where we're talking about productivity. We want people to move forward. So for everything that has a goal, there's an enemy. So the enemy of productivity is laziness. It's the otherwise not doing of something you should do. So keep in mind that this is all very subjective. And so the bigger thing is that there's this deeper separation of having versus needing, meaning I have to do this versus I need to do this. And so, always think about have to versus get to, like being able to self-author certain things. So in the sense, it's like, and having versus needing might not be the right word, but in a sense, it's like, do you have to do it or do you need to do it? And I think that's it, because obviously there's a connotation to that. I realize the words are fairly similar in their application, but if you don't have to do it, you're not going to do it. Like that, as simple as that. I think there's a piece of this that like your body knows a lot more deeper truth than we're aware of. And so oftentimes if we're lazy about something, it's because we don't need to do it. There's not a need. So, I think that's a big distinction to make, is like when you're looking at laziness, there's a certain level of conscientiousness and industriousness that gets applied by people who are quote unquote high performers that isn't always beneficial, but it looks like something. And so I think, and we'll get to in a second, this idea of like actively doing something that's not necessarily productive. So, first thing is, who says what value system is being judged that's calling someone lazy? And then is it simply they're not doing something because they don't have to do it, it's not that important, or, and they're only doing what they need to do? And I think if you look very closely, the things that we do are things that we need to do. And now we can talk about whether that's actually applied or if it's a storytelling tactic, but we'll come back to that in a minute. The last thing is that a lot of times we'll get in a situation of calling someone lazy when they don't reciprocate to us in the way that we want to be reciprocated to. So you see this often in relationships when you're looking at love languages. It's like, if I'm physical touch, this, I think it's oversimplified, but in your words of affirmation, and I go give you a hug and you tell me you love me, if I'm not mature in my understanding of that, I can feel upset because you didn't pay it back. Like you didn't do the thing back to me. And so I think oftentimes we look at this kind of goodwill, this expression of energy, as karma, so to speak, as we expect it to be this kind of like, I don't know, binary nature, but binary is not the right word. There's like a connected, like I do this, reciprocal nature is that I do this for you, you do something back for me, and you do something back for me in a way that is something I can receive. And so I think there's something about that, but that can create this kind of like mismatch in a sense where I do something, like if I give a gift to you, if I go give a gift for you and then you don't give me a gift back, that technically looks like there's a mismatch in some sense. But the question is, did I give you a gift for me or did I give you a gift for you? I mean, did I give you something because I wanted to show you that I love you? Or is this like a selfish thing that I'm doing because I want you to have this thing and I want you to feel good about me? So understand that when we're looking at laziness, a lot of this is a judgment based off of the exchange of energy. And if I'm doing something for somebody, generally family members are the biggest, let's say, problems in a situation. You're doing something because of your brother, your mother, your sister, or whatever, their family. So you do something to your family member and they don't either reciprocate it or they don't like do something about it, like whatever, you'll have conversations, you pour your life and energy into these people and they don't do anything about it. Understand that people do everything through triangulation and that energy is always returned in a circuitous manner. Circuitous means that it's not obvious and it's not direct. It could be the long way around. But if you start to understand that there's endless goodwill, and goodwill meaning a positivity, like going out in the sunlight, you can always find gratitude for things, that there's a lot of space for that. And the person who is giving is also open to receiving. And so there's a broader way, but understand that like if I go and do something for somebody, that oftentimes the offshoot of that interaction will be something that I may not see or be aware of, and it might be in a precession, so meaning an 90-degree angle to the degree that I intended it to go. So understand that so much of our conversation around laziness and procrastination is a subjective thing that doesn't necessarily actually apply to any type of productivity. So once we start to look at procrastination, like if we're attacking laziness, then we got to say, what is procrastination? So what does it look like? So oftentimes we can start to see like, what is our judgment of these things? And so there's an experience and there's an external view of it. So I think there's two types of procrastination. And again, these are all my semantic definitions, so feel free to disagree. But broadly speaking, it seems like there's active procrastination and passive procrastination. So this active procrastination is this resistance to trust. Now, I define trusting as the ability to be in relationship with. So you think about the things you trust. I trust my body. You think about the way you use the word trust. I trust my body. I trust the ground. I trust, you technically will put your money in a bank. It's called at a trust. So there's a relationship we have with trust, which is like it's a physical knowing of. So if it's a resistance to trust, it means I'm resisting a relationship. I'm not. So, for example, like let's just say you're in a relationship with somebody and they're micromanaging you, and you say, "Well, don't you trust me?" It's like, aren't you in a relationship to know me? Do you know me? Like, do you know how I would act in that sense? And the resistance to trust is a resistance to know. It's a resistance to be in relationship with. It's a resistance to see, in a sense. So, trust is required for love, and we could go down that line. But the point is, if you're actively procrastinating, what you're doing is you're doing a bunch of stuff, but you're not necessarily doing stuff that matters. And so you end up in a situation where because you won't look and pay attention to what matters, you end up just doing stuff. And so that looks like I get up, I make my bed, I do my morning routine, I have my coffee, I say my affirmations, I look in the mirror, I do all that productive stuff. And yet none of those things are actually moving the needle. And so I think Alex Ramosi is a great example of someone who's pragmatically focused on, does it move the needle? And so in some sense, he's an antidote to the people who will sell you on any number of specific tertiary applications of your energy. And so anything that is not moving in an important level, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's always, an obvious thing. So for example, taking an afternoon nap could move the needle, even though it's not doing something because it refreshes your brain. So the point is that I think it goes down to a deeper level of subjective knowing. Like it's kind of like if you're talking to a kid and you say, "Hey, this just isn't the right thing to do," and it's like, you're depending on their capacity to have some type of intuitive, subjective, or no, subjective conscientiousness that is aware of certain things. Like you hurt someone's feelings, like, okay, yeah, I know I did that was wrong. Like there's a certain application to this. So in the question though, if you don't know what that means and you're doing a lot of stuff, it's okay to do things to try because that means you're working in some direction. But understand it's like if there's not some level of like at least an elevator pitch for what the value of this thing is or how it's impacting you moving forward, that's probably active procrastination. And that's fine because a lot of people do a lot of stuff with active procrastination. Like you clean the house, you do a lot of things, but understand that that's still a form of procrastination because it's putting off the thing that's important. The other side of this is passive procrastination. So this is resistance to effort. Now, I'll come back to this, but this oftentimes has a lot to do with nervous system activation. So I'll break that down in the next slide. But you can think about this as a frozen. So there's a parasympathetic and sympathetic differentiation, but this resistance to effort is often more of a depressed frozenness. So there's either too many options, things are overwhelmed, you don't know what to do, you failed last time, or you have some level of like inability to, fear of failure, whatever you want to call it. But that's this resistance to effort. And so this is the quintessential thing where people look like they're lazy because they're not a busybody, they're just laying around. But oftentimes there's a deeper narrative and story to that. But this idea of resistance to effort, and yes, this can be the quintessential person who could do better and often is the free rider that's lazy. But I think if you look at people in this binary, you're lazy versus you're productive, you oftentimes miss the messiness of humans. And there's so much more that goes on with humanity and that we all understand as individuals, yet we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. And so offering the other person the opportunity to have their intention does matter. Yes, there are still people that are just, for whatever reason, lazy. So we can leave that there, but I think it's a subset. So the thing that brings both of these active and passive procrastinations to an end is pain. And so pain is, in some sense, applied consequence. It's something that is friction on the system that taxes you to the point that there's no way to look around it. So, for example, the act of procrastination gets to burnout because they're trying everything, doing everything, and nothing's getting the result they want. People don't get burnt out when things are working. I mean, they get burnt out. So you could say they get burnt out when the things they're doing aren't getting the result they want, or when they're getting the result they want, but it's not the result that they need, in a sense. So, no one gets burnt out. People that love what they do and they continue to show up and they do it year after year, they have a self-awareness and an effective set of actions. Like no one gets burnt out when they're like loving what they're doing and it's working. It's like they get burnt out when they're not paying attention to changing of the season. And pain from a passive procrastination looks like literally like pain in a sense. Like you're frozen, your body starts to hurt, your joint. Like there's a you're running out of money, you're running in a natural world, pain from a frozen procrastination would be I'm hungry, I need shelter, I'm unsafe, whatever these natural consequences are, which I think consequence is something that's valuable. We'll come back to that in a moment. But the idea is that pain of something you can no longer avoid, you hit rock bottom, so to speak, that forces you to look, to see, and to move. And I think that's the big difference. So the antidote to procrastination is pain. Now, why you procrastinate is very important. So this is where we get to nervous system activation. So as many of you are aware, there's of your nervous system function, you've got your autonomic and your somatic nervous system, that is of your central nervous system. So central nervous system, your central nervous system is broken down as your so it's back up. Nervous system. Autonomic, which is like the process that's happening below awareness, and the somatic, which is our awareness, conscientious thing. That's what I was missing. There's your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. So peripheral nervous system is everything that goes out from the spinal cord. Your central nervous system is your brain and spinal cord. In your central nervous system, you have your autonomous and your somatic. Your somatic is your conscious awareness. Your autonomic is your subconscious or subperceptual. Generally, we have some level of overlap there, but that's kind of tertiary to the conversation. In the autonomic nervous system, we have our sympathetic and our parasympathetic. These are really the things that operate us. So when we think about us, the entity, the essence, the being that is us, it's a lot smaller of a control panel than we might consider. Once you play in the fact of genetics, hormones, bacteria that live in our gut, and then trained wired nervous system function. So that could be family of origin stuff, societal norms. There's a lot of stuff that go in and create us. So you could arguably say that the person we are in this moment is a reaction to the person that we chose to be in the past. Now, the healthier you are, the more of this capacity you have for free will, so to speak, to move intentionally towards discomfort and pain. So this is my perception of it, but it might only be 1% of who you are is really who you choose to be. Everything else is a reaction to untold number of environmental stimuli, bacterial conglomerations in your body. So there's a lot that goes on in this why you procrastinate. But ultimately, when you start to see that there's a very, it's not necessarily just this like self-authored bootstraps individual that is carrying yourself forward, but as often you're trying to navigate, negotiate decisions that were made in the past and then figure out things moving forward. It gives you a little bit more pause and consideration for the things you're going through. So when we look at these nervous system functions, they dictate a lot about how we act in any setting. So there's only so much you can force yourself to do. And, David Goggins being a standout in terms of someone who can just absolutely force himself to do whatever, ironically, except for probably sit still, which would, is the joke of it all. But when you look at these things, the first and foremost is that you procrastinate because you can. They're not important tasks. Like the things that you say you want to do don't matter, and you know it, and you're not going to do it. I think in some sense, if you think of Jonathan Haidt's analogy of the elephant and the rider, the elephant being our body, this kind of like massive lump of bacteria and hormones and sympathetic reactions and parasympathetic counteractions, that's 90% of what's motivating us. We have this rider up here, this prefrontal cortex that we get used to living in because it's narrative. That we're like, oh, okay, yeah, like I'm a self-authored individual. That elephant for some people is much stronger than others. And this goes down to storytelling. So how much you can tell and dictate yourself that something matters. So this is where you can say, for example, something potentially menial, like making your bed, can be just like, I'm not going to get up. That's stupid. Why do I need to make the bed? I'm going to go back and do it later. Or you could tell yourself a story about how it's important to be a conscientious, organized person. If you don't do it, everything else in your life, you could take the mantra and the lens of how you do anything is how you do everything. And if I can't make my bed, everything else is going to fall apart because I'm going to be lazy and I'm going to be toxic. And so you see how you can make a story, but anytime you tell a story, you're ratcheting up the subjective the importance of an action, and that creates a long-term cost. Meaning, if it's not important enough to do on its own right, then it's important because I either force myself to do it or I can create gratitude. So the healthy way to tell a story is to create gratitude for, I can't believe I have a house. This is amazing. I want it to look nice and take care of it and honor that. And so you could also say, if I don't do that, then I'll look like a slob. There's a double-edged sword to all that stuff, but understand that most things that aren't inherently done, almost all things that just aren't inherently done, is because they're not important. They don't matter. And if you can honor that and say, yeah, they're not important, but I choose to do it, that allows you to look at the joke of life head on and just tackle it. But in the event that you have to tell yourself a story and continue to ratchet up the importance of something, then you get to the point where eventually you can't. You can't procrastinate. I'm sorry, you procrastinate because you can't do it. You get frozen. And so that frozenness is an over. So when you think about the fight, there's the sympathetic, which is our fight flight, and our parasympathetic, which is our flow freeze. Now, it's a different application than has traditionally been explained. This is something that Julian Pinot has been very helpful for me understanding. But in a sense, every conscious action we do forward is in flight mode, or is in fight mode, I should say. Sorry. Every conscious action we do outward facing in the world is fight mode. I am intentionally moving in a direction of, this is something I'm doing. I'm attacking the day, so to speak. And so fight has a negative connotation, but it really just means anything I'm moving. I'm engaging this conversation. I'm in fight mode. Now, to the degree that I can actively handle this, my body will be there, focused, heart rate, producing a little bit of lactate, getting the heart rate up, breathing, everything goes up. It's like a natural response to a physical, emotional, psychological stress. If I get overwhelmed, meaning the hunt turns into me being hunted, I start to hunt something and it turns around and hunting me, I'm going after a workout, then it starts going after me, like that level of, I misjudged the amount of psychological, emotional, physical, physiological resources that I need, I then get to flight mode. So my body says, hey, we can't handle this, we got to get away, we're backing out. So I start to shoot lactate through the body, carbon dioxide is high in the blood, respiration goes up, heart rate goes up, cortisol's up, my brain stops to function well because of the acidity in my blood, I get scattered and I have to get away. It's just a panic mode of, you need to get away. Now, in the environment that would be accompanied with, if I survive, I got away, and so it goes to runaway freeze mode, in a sense. So the parasympathetic is flow and freeze. Flow being, I'm relaxed, I'm here. So generally good performance is fight, flow, fight, flow, fight, flow. Think about a boxer. They hit and they relax. They hit and relax. And so it's this kind of back and forth. When I get runaway sympathetic, I get to flight mode, meaning I'm panic, I got to get away. Runaway parasympathetic means I'm frozen. It's a very old inherited defense mechanism from bugs, which is a very old ancestor. I freeze. So the point is, if I can't flight and get away, then I just freeze and hope something works out. It's obviously not a good survival system, but sometimes it works. So the only option is I freeze. And so in an environment where I went at something, I thought I could handle it, I realized I couldn't, I got away, but I couldn't get away, and now I'm frozen. That's where you get to this passive procrastination. You're frozen, you're depressed, your body's everything about your body is down. Testosterone is low, your attention is low, dopamine is low, you're just frozen. Now, the thing that gets me out of that is the pain, meaning I'm hungry, I need to go do something. But in the natural environment, we would have had some level of accompanying information that got fed back to our system and said, hey, this is what you did, this is what went wrong, this is what we're going to do better in the future. So with that, I can then circle back into the flight. But when our internal and external environment do not match, and I can get stuck into flight mode because client got mad at me, an email threw it wrong, something I did failed that I attached my sense of self to, and it failed. I went to flight mode, and then I went to freeze mode, and I didn't get any feedback. I can get stuck there. And guess what? Because I can order food from my couch, I can watch Netflix, I can do whatever. There's not really any pain that's going to force me back out of that until something happens. That's where you're rock bottom. So the point is, you're procrastinating because you're frozen. You don't know what to do because the thing you tried last time didn't work, and so you're overwhelmed. So the difference is that until we get some level of feedback on what we can do to get back in the flight, we stay there. And so the other reason you procrastinate is because you're underprepared. Now, this level of frozenness, or there's two types of this. It could be the first type where you just don't really know what to do and no one's taught you. And it could be as simple as going on Google and getting a set of information to make the next step. But oftentimes there's an unpreparedness that happens with, I got hurt last time and I don't know what went wrong and I'm not about to do that again. And so that level of unpreparedness, which is this, I don't know the next step I need to take, that's something that isn't always something to be figured out. Sometimes it's a level of perspective. And so that's being able to step back and think, see if they see things through a bigger lens. And so this is the level of, like, in time, you go through multiple iterations, you see things. So for example, as Max said at the beginning, some of the conversations we had early on didn't really make sense until months later. And so there's a wanting and a forcing of something before you're quote unquote ready for it. It's just simply that you lack the perspective and the emotional wherewithal to be able to handle the the reality. So the procrastination can be, I want to do this, I'm just not ready. And every time I try this, it doesn't work. And that leads to a frozen. And the frozenness gets stuck because you don't have the prepared necessary emotional skills to move forward. So there's a much deeper level behind procrastination than just someone's being lazy, but it's important to understand that a lot of it has to do with nervous system application. The last thing to talk about is that motivation is cheap. So this is what we look at is like motivation doesn't do anything, but consequence does. Now, motivation is simply a positive telling of a story about what could be. That's great. That's lovely, right? But it doesn't mean anything without any consequence. So the reason you get people to do things or the reason you act is because of consequence. And if you think about yourself like an animal, a horse doesn't just go run around and do whatever. Like if you have a mule that has to carry something, they go with consequence. And that consequence could be the removal of a reward, it could be the addition of a punishment, anything. But oftentimes when you were looking at people, there's no consequence until they hit rock bottom. They're going to keep going until something really breaks. And so the best thing you could ever do for someone is not limit feedback. And by not limit feedback, we could take an analogy from feet and running. When people have their feedback cut away from their foot by wearing thick shoes, they run poorly, they walk poorly, their body hurts. So if you want someone to learn how to run, it takes 5 minutes. You take their shoes off, you get them a very safe, straightforward place, and you let them feel it out and slowly build up confidence. That's how you do it. You take away you apply consequence back to it. Most of the world, literally almost the entirety of the capitalist economy is built on removing consequence from people, which in a sense removes feedback. When you remove consequence, you remove feedback. So the way you get somebody to move and do something, and this is true for yourself as well, is you apply consequence. You say, all right, I'm living with my parents. This is what I talked about Max way back, is he was living with his parents. I'm like, all right, if you want to be successful, move out from your parents. Guess you know why? It'll force you to make some money. And then that'll force you to stop thinking yourself so high and mighty about how you want to develop skills and be this big thing. It's like, no, I need to make money. And the lowest level of that is I have to make money. Alex Hormozi, to use him as an example, because I think he's the quintessential example of some of this stuff. Moved across country, sold everything, and then lived at the floor of a gym for a few months. Like, if that doesn't motivate you to try and make money, nothing else will. So in a sense, it's like, if you want to force yourself to have an outcome, make it so that the outcome is the only necessary, that outcome is the only possible outcome that is available. And so that means removing the things that prevent your feedback. If you want to get used to being outside, go be outside. Like, there's a lot of things that you could specifically adapt that to your circumstance, but the point is add consequence. Then the way that you get yourself to not let that consequence overwhelm you is by storytelling. And so this is one of the things that makes humans special, is that we have the capacity to future cast and to create a narrative around our experiences. So that's the storytelling thing. That's our prefrontal cortex. Within this storytelling, we're able to set a bigger perspective and then understand things. So the past isn't just a fixed thing. It's how we understand it. A big part of therapy is going through and re-understanding things that happen to us, telling ourselves a thing in a narrative that makes sense and builds the story of you. The story of you is something that changes every single day based off information you learn. You can have something that completely upends everything or a small little adjustment, but it's a practice of going back and manicuring and understanding and retelling this experience that we've had in a way that makes sense. That's part of building a bigger narrative, because when we can understand the past, we can understand the future in a sense where things are going, because we have an arc, and then we can then put ourselves in a now that is somewhere in between that. So the way you manage consequence of pain without being overwhelmed is by telling yourself a story. When you go and you work out and you hurt your body intentionally, you tell yourself a story. It's because you're getting stronger, getting more capable, and you're moving in the correct direction. What that is depends on you. But otherwise, if you think about going to the gym objectively, you're going and doing objectively pointless work that is subjectively challenging, and it will cause you pain, break your body down. But within the storytelling narrative, our bodies heal and grow. And I think there's a valuable thought exercise to think of which came first, the storytelling and the growth, or the growth and the storytelling. There's a top down versus bottom up. But the point is that when you can tell yourself a better story, the motivation is unnecessary, because you're able to picture yourself in a larger battle, a larger narrative that is contingent on you making the next step happen. And when you see things as a next step, they don't become the thing you don't want to do. They become the obvious next step of, if I want to get this program built, I need to make a video. If I want to do that, I have to learn how to edit videos. If I want to learn that, and so you could say you can work backwards. Within every single task picture story you want to create, there will be fractals of things you're good at and things you're not good at. And the things you're good at will bump up until they're limited by the things you're not good at. And then you become focused on the thing you're not good at. That's the pain, and you get develop of that. And so once you get better at that, then that becomes another limiting factor. There are constant fractals of growth, pain, discomfort, and overcoming that happen every single time. It's the death, birth, rebirth kind of thing. Within that is how you move forward. And it's not about motivation. It's just about understanding yourself in a bigger place. And if you're relying on motivation, it's because you're not authoring the story, or you don't really like the story you're telling, and you're telling someone else's story. The last thing to say is a mantra that's been very helpful for me is push hard with a loose grip. It is not a problem to care. It's not a problem to want things. It's actually good to want and move and push hard. And I mean, with a lot of intention, you do your best to make things happen. In the event that something changes, you have a loose grip. It means you shift. You don't give up the boat. You never sacrifice the war for the battles. And so this is something in jiu-jitsu. You push hard, you move. But in so much as the leverage has changed, the person who can't let go of the grip, they break their arm. The person who can let go of the grip can move on to a new open space. So you go with things as opposed to trying to force things. Push hard with a loose grip. And yeah. All right. Sorry for keeping your dopamine completely ruined, but there you go. Black and white.
Wonderful. That was awesome. Appreciate you for sharing all that. And you really set it up that it wasn't going to be nothing, but it sounds like you got a lot of material there. Does anybody have any questions for Graham? Any of the specific topics that he brought up?
I didn't say the presentation was nothing. I said the presentation. That's a word used. Presentation was boring, but there was more information, but the presentation of it was boring.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks so much. And could you provide like a practical example of how you apply that theory to like a common day procrastination that you've overcome?
It's so the point of this is like you give yourself context for what's going on in a sense. So what I've learned to appreciate about myself is that there are, okay, there are certain things that if it's, I'll wait to the last minute to do things, but it doesn't matter if I got it done, so all right. There are certain things that I need the consequence of procrastinating, like making the whatever you call it, doing things ahead of time, like at the last minute, that it's like, okay, there's an added pressure, but sometimes I just need that to start. And it's okay. And then there are other times where if I'm not acting, it's because I either don't need, so it's just basically understanding of like, why am I not acting on this thing I say I want to? Is it, I'm not missing some piece, it's not the right move, or I don't have to do it yet. And I think there's a piece of that where it's like, you don't get into the self-flagellation thing of like, I'm worthless, I'm too lazy, I'm not going to happen. It's like, I'll get it done. And I think there's a level of self-confidence and trust you have with is like, I can do hard things and I can get things done. And I think there's a lot of value to that because controlling the narrative, so to speak, in so much as you can is really about starting to understand things. And if you can't understand the things that are going on internally, then you allow that, then potentially it can become a runaway train of just beating yourself up. And that's how you get nothing done, because that's how you get to the frozen. So it's that sense of self. So every time you do something intentionally, you're in sympathetic mode, you're attacking the day, so to speak. You're trying to move forward. And when you get to the point where the thing, it doesn't even have to be like I lost. It could just be like, you could be moving forward and have something pop up and create an emotional storm in your brain that makes you feel like I'm really down. I'm not good enough. I'm not going to be successful. And then you start to like piece that into a bigger story, whether it's like, okay, well, let me reflect on the last 5 times this happened. I'm okay. Or let me think, well, what is the thing I need to move forward? What's the thing I'm going? And so then the last piece of that is like, there's probably 2 corollaries to that of there's the thing that you stop moving forward because there's something that you don't want to do that you know you need to do. And so then it's like turning to face that. So like are you frozen and you're not doing anything, or you're passive, or are you active and you're doing everything except for the thing you need to do? And that's reflected by the fact that you had this feeling of frustration on the inside. There's this feeling of like, I'm doing so much, but it doesn't seem to be like making the results I want. I'm not making more money. I'm not having more connection, whatever these things are. It's like the thing that you want, that you want, that is not happening. It's like, I'm doing this stuff. It's like, there's probably something I'm missing. And it doesn't mean you change course. It's just you have to look at things. And that's where like having a coach can help a lot, because like they can sit there and say, well, you're obvious. It's obvious to somebody else. It's very not obvious to you, and you're very liable to shift course and do a bunch of different things. And so like the idea though is being aware of, the underlying thing you're really avoiding. So practical would be I love to write copy and do all that stuff and make a story and narrative, and I wasn't making as much money as I was a year ago, and so there's something, I was like, something's off. So like this frustration of like, I have the story, well, because I'm doing this, because I'm doing this, because I'm doing this. And eventually I was like, what, I'm not making money. What's going on? And so I sat down with a friend and a coach and like went through things, and I was like, oh, my landing pages are way too complicated, literally way too complicated. And it was talking about the attention span of like, what does someone expect when they get this page? When they expect a very clear description of what this thing is and how to get it. So I had to go for the painful process of deleting at least half of all my website, just cutting out every single thing that wasn't necessary. That was something I didn't want to do because it was a sense of self. I like that I write. I like that I can write well. I like to be able to write and create this whole thing that you're going to have no problems, and you're going to go with absolutely no questions and buy everything. Give me all your money. It's going to be great. And it was making everything worse. So the thing that I love to do was making my life worse. That was something I put off for months and months. Eventually, the pain of like, you're not making any money, I'm forced me to change. And that change happened with addressing the thing that I'm like, yeah, I know I need to do this. Yeah, I know I need to do this. But I kept procrastinating and putting it off very actively, mind you. But
Thank you, man. Thank you for that.
Graham, could you talk about your experience with like therapy and how that? I feel like that's kind of a topic that most people wouldn't talk about, but I know you've been impacted by it a lot. So
I'll differentiate between therapy and coaching. So it started off, my journey started with therapy. I think of therapy in its truest form as a very passive, someone asks you questions and then it allows you the time to think, which is valuable for people because most people have never been listened to in their life. And so therapy is a valuable time to be listened to. And I think the first shift of saying, okay, someone will actually listen to me, and there's an exchange you pay someone, they listen to you, which is good because, in reality, like if you have a really close, good friend, that is the natural function of a therapist in a sense. I'm now, once it's gotten to the point of BetterHelp is online and it's a commercial, it's no longer valuable. I think that once it gets commodified, to anything that gets commodified to the point that they're making commercials about it, has lost the essence of it. But I would say that the first step of therapy, which is, you don't need coaching because you have no idea where you're going. Therapy is a time where you can have someone ask you very obvious, simple questions, and it gives you the chance to think for the first time. And the value of therapy is it forces you to speak out loud. And so there is a difference between things you think you know and things you say. Once you say it, it becomes real in some sense. So I would say that therapy works as a step in the right direction if you combine it with journal, which is taking that therapy session and applying it to yourself, meaning have a question, have a thought, and then ideate on it. So I'm working that way. Every time I go into therapy, I get better at describing this thing. So therapy and journaling function together as some level of cobbling together a purpose, a narrative, and a story within like a nebulous cloud of things, facts, potential. Then you shift into more of the coaching. And I think also psychedelics, as you get a little bit of better awareness, can be very helpful there because they shift you out of the rut that is you. Eventually, I think the more opportune place to be is in a coaching situation where you have someone that's going to give you more active feedback. And it might be, just a my personality thing, but it fits much better. That got in therapy and it was like, okay, I spent a few months, and this started 2018. I was married at the time, and that was not working out well. I did not have the emotional or the relationship skills to be able to manage that well. And so got therapy and started to think and process through some of those things in combination with journaling. And then later on the mushroom trips. And then eventually it's like you start to get a more clear idea of what it is you want to work towards. And that's when you start working with a coach, because you develop, if you're attending to the pain of your life and you're getting a clear understanding of those in therapy, then you either sit around and mope about it or you act on it. And if you act on it, you get rid of the shit friends. You start to get rid of your bad habits. You start to change and align yourself with a bigger purpose. And in so much as you are clear on that, then you're no longer going to put up with people who don't care about you. Your family members, and I say family, but my family is like, I have a level of relationship with them, but it's not one of those active, I'm always with them and talking all the time. But I do say family because most people are very bound to a set of blood relatives that they have no specific relation like with outside of the fact that they're just shared genes, and that holds them back a lot. But family, friends, expectations, colleagues, norms, whatever it is, those things, you start to let go of those. The things that cause you pain, you start to work towards what you could be. And in so much as you're able to do that, you start to get a better, clearer and clearer. Every iteration, you get a clearer perspective on who you are and what you're working towards. That's when you get a coach. If you want to play, like I think it's we typically think of coaching as something that's assigned towards sports and athletes. But the thing we miss is if you look at the overlying archetype is that an athlete is someone who's very clearly competing for a prize. Now, that doesn't have to be a physical thing if you look at the clear derivation of the Latin and Greek stem words, but someone competes for a prize. Now, it's very simple to use the analogy of someone who wants to be a pole vaulter. They're going to go work on that. So what does a coach do? Tells them, this is what you're doing wrong. This is what you need to do different. This is how we're going to get there. That's a coach. That's someone you want in your life because that's someone who's in your corner moving you forward. Therapy is like, it can turn into this kind of like verbal masturbation of like thinking about your problems, talking about your problems, and someone's making money off of you sitting there not actually incentivized to get better. Coaching is someone that is incentivized by you getting better. You see results from coaching. With therapy, I don't know. I'm not saying you shouldn't start with therapy. I think that's the necessary and optimal start place for most people. Hiring a coach before you know what you're doing, it's like that's called a waste of money. Hiring a therapist when you know what you're doing, called a waste of money. It's like, but I think that they're both necessary steps, and I think it's valuable for people to see where those line up. That's my perspective. It could be wrong, probably is, but there you are.
Yeah, I would say most likely wrong, but
Certainly.
just kidding. Does anybody have any questions, Graham? I don't know how
Yes,
long
no.
he has. You got another one, Garrett?
Is the procrastination coaching a service that you provide, or can you recommend any coaches that could help with overcoming procrastination and the issues associated?
It sounds the way you phrase that is it's what I want. Obviously, it means I failed on my presentation. Is the point is not the procrastination. The point is the procrastination is a sign and a marker that there's something deeper that is going on. And so, in that sense, if you want to do a coaching call or you want to work with someone that you feel would be helpful on some level of insight, then yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of those things. I do coaching calls. If you think I'm valuable in terms of my ability to say something direct to you, then absolutely. But it's not like I don't do procrastination coaching. It's like in a sense, like what's the pain? What's the problem? And move forward from there. So the point of the presentation was to say that if you're procrastinating, the point isn't to stop procrastinating. The point is to figure out what's going on that's leading to that in a sense. And so you take a step back because anytime you apply the label of a procrastination, then there's a judgment with that, especially in this modern day lexicon. So, if you think I would be valuable to a coaching call with it, absolutely you could do that. But it's like I think it's also valuable to understand that there will be a set of layers that are pulled away that's going to get from like at the end of the day, I don't care whatever, it's like the forward motion. I think deeply we want to be loved and seen as children in a sense. So getting to that is oftentimes not necessarily related to the goal we say we want. So I'm not going to say we want to force you to get to this thing. It's like, let's get you rid of, let's address the lower lying pain. And I think once you address the lowest level of pain, you free yourself up for optionality. And within so, then you might end up on a different path than what you think. So that's where I get at. It's like, it's not necessarily like, I will be happy when I do this. It's like, how many people need to go Tom Brady wins 6 Super Bowls and he's still not happy? It's like, it's not about doing more. It's about like, this underlying piece. But yes, hopefully that rambling answer gives you some level of preparation for what you might encounter.
Yes, for sure.
Anybody else? Steven, looks like you got something to say.
Yeah. Any questions? You could ask about anything you want.
No, he doesn't. Okay. Bradley? Daniel? Got your cameras on?
No particular question. Just yeah, great presentation. Like I can resonate with a lot of the stuff that Graham said. Just wanted to share that. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Graham, I got one more then for you, and then I'll let you go. Could you talk about one of the biggest paradigms that you helped me shift was this idea of looking at your life through the lens of problems versus maybe opportunities? But you told me, well, you're looking at your knee as a problem because it hurts right now. But what if it wasn't a problem? And yeah, I've kind of pretty much eliminated the word problem from my language, and I look at the world now through questions of, how can I build an event business is one of the questions I'm answering right now, versus I'm not making money. How can I make more money? Or like, I'm not making money. This is a problem in my life. So yeah, can you touch a little bit on that, just that paradigm?
Well, I think problem and opportunity is a semantic wordplay. You could say, I got this problem versus I got this opportunity. It's like, if you call your knee pain a problem or an opportunity, it's the same thing. It's just, and that's our narrative storytelling. So I think there's value in that in so much as you need that. But it's also asking better questions. And so there's a few layers. You could say, what problems do you want? Because associated with ever outcome or opportunity or risk or whatever you want to have, that there's always a problem. And so like you choose, the capacity to choose your problems is the quintessential essence of free will. I'm like, I get to choose my problems. Like, if I want different problems, I would. I think that there's an iterative process that happens when people get through layers and layers of starting to say, yeah, I chose those problems, I didn't like them, so I wanted different problems, and I kept working. And so you refine the problems you choose. And I think that the iteration process means you, every single time you get it, you realize you have more autonomy, more capacity. The first time people get through this, it's oftentimes like, I think it almost always relates to matters of the body, because I think that's like, as children, we learn how to walk and move and exist in our body. And so I think that's our natural boarding ramp to life. And from most adults who are really grown children and don't have any semblance of maturity and capacity in their life, they end up having to start there. And so you look and say, well, what problems is that? Well, my knees hurt, my joints are achy, I weigh too much, whatever it is. It's like, okay, like, do you want better problems? Oftentimes they've never even thought that they don't. Like, this is the harm, so to speak, of writing off things as it's genetics, or it's just a disease, or it's just normal. It's the way it is. It's like, because in normalizing, we take away the capacity for autonomy. If it's normal that people are obese, then it's like, there's nothing you can do about it. It's normal. And like, whether or not it's could be normal, normalizing it takes away your capacity to dictate your life. And I think that in that process, it's like, okay, what things do I want to not accept and move forward on? And that's where you get to say, these are the problems I want. And so, broadly speaking, though, when you look and say, how can I ask better questions? I think that's what you hinted at without saying outright. It was like, now you're asking better questions. And a question well asked is an answer half formed. So you're thinking, moving in the right direction, I'm asking better questions and saying, like, what do I want for my life? And so I think the issue is that when we identify with our problems, we get stuck there. And so the identifying of ourself means we can't dream bigger. So the question is like, my knee hurts. Well, your knee hurts because in some sense, and I know this is a very oversimplification, your knee hurts because you don't want it to not hurt. You've identified with it. You made your whole identity knee pain. I'm going to go fix knee pain. And I'm going to fix knee pain through the sleds. And the sleds are going to be on knee pain. I'm going to fix knee pain with sleds. I'm a sled knee pain guy. And then, not that Ben that does that, but I think that was one of the things you were talking about a while back. Maybe somebody else. But the point is, like, it doesn't matter what it is. We identify with our problems, and we like them like little puppies. We hold them, and we don't want them to go away because we love them so much. And that's where most people are. And they can't even dream about life without the problem. And so then their problem never gets better because they need their problem, or else who are they? And I think that's kind of the sickness that we see, where people are over-identifying. So the question isn't, necessarily around like, I'm going to never say the word problem, I'm going to say opportunities. It's like, that works for sure. Like, that can, even if that small semantic shift can like change your inner dialogue. But sometimes I find it helpful, like, what would you do if you didn't have this problem? And most people can't even imagine life without it. That's when you know you're stuck. So like saying, well, if I can't say, the person who is like, if I didn't have this problem, like, I got aches and pains, I got things that hurt on me, fingers and shoulders and elbows and whatever, because of rolling jiu-jitsu and running and stuff like that. But like, I'm not gonna let those stop me, because it's like, I got, what would you do if this wasn't a problem? I'd go and do this. And so there's an overlap between, I have a pure problem and it keeps me from doing my life, and I have a pure life with no problems that prevent me. There's an overlap there that people won't get, because they think that success is only, I got to the pure success and there's no pain whatsoever, as opposed to a gradation of, I didn't let this pain stop me and I started doing it. Even if it's, my shoulder dislocated, it's like 2 months ago or a month and a half ago, or sublux, whatever. And it's like, well, I can't do pure jiu-jitsu without having to worry about it, but I can't do not pure jiu-jitsu and only be a bum shoulder guy, because that's fucking hell. So I was like, okay, well, it's 90% shoulder, 10% jujitsu. It means I'm only going to roll with a very selective, small group of guys, and it's very light. And then the week after that, it was 80% shoulder, 20% jujitsu, and then 70% and 30%. And so it shifted until now it's back to 20% shoulder and 80% jujitsu. And it's like an asymptote. I mean, never get all the way out, especially when you get something like an injury deep in your brain. But the point is like, you think, what would I do if I didn't have this pain? And you go live that way. And don't expect it's like not magic. It's like, oh, I just thought magically and all went away. It's like, no, accept the fact that there's a messy middle that 99.9% of life happens in. And if you can accept that, then it's like, yeah, I may am in pain. I back a little bit off this. So you can deal with the pain, whatever. But it's like, be flexible. And that's the whole point of being flexible, is you can shift and move around. And so that's all. Hopefully that's helpful for you. But I think that's the thing that people get stuck, is they get perfection and they think stupid binaries as opposed to a spectrum of movement.
Yeah, Max is trying to unmute me in the middle. He's like, this guy has a question, but whatever. The storytelling thing is interesting, especially with procrastination, because I've always been a person who gets everything done, but gets it done in the last like 2 hours before it's due. And typically it's like decent quality, but it's just like wait to the end, because in my brain, I would justify it and give myself the story that I could work faster, I could do better, if I waited that extra time to make myself do it. So I think rewriting that story in my head could definitely help me get stuff done like earlier, especially days before, instead of waiting till the days after or the days like it's due. The other thing with like clients, when you're helping them kind of change the story in their head, are you prompting stuff or how does that work?
Well, the first thing I would say is that, like, in some sense, done is ship to ship. And so, like, better is a nebulous term. It could literally always be better. So there's this Parkinson's law, which is that things expand in proportion to the time given them. So, like, I made the presentation at 15 minutes before. Like, I woke up and did it. But, like, I had written multiple. Once I told Max I would do this, I sat down and, like, fleshed out my thoughts for, like, 15, or I wrote 4 different blogs about it, because that's this. I'm going to answer that in 2 different ways, because I think it's the first part of that question is, like, there's some things that, like, they don't matter, and spending more time on things that don't matter is wasting your life. So it's like, sometimes there's like, I can get shippable done, because what matters is what I say, not necessarily what the words on the screen look like. So, like, figure out what matters and do that. And if you're good at that, which I think a lot of people that procrastinate sometimes rely on themselves and they make shit stuff, but, like, would your life have been demonstrably better if that thing you made was 10% better? Probably not. It's like, and the other thing is, understand you're still doing stuff, even if you're not doing it. Like, you're doing other things, but notice everything in your life is like that. So, like, I'm late to almost everything, but I'm fully there. And then that runs over the next thing. So, like, all the time you spent not doing that thing, you probably were reading or learning or doing something or working out or experiencing life that fed to that. So I often find that, like, there's a difference between inspiration and, like, being forced to do something. Like, you have to go for it. So, like, if I get inspired by something and I want to create and write and do that, like, that's where writing is for me. And so what I found is, like, fleshing out ideas happens when you have, like, that inspiration, but also, like, the way you handle that is, can you make other forms of deadlines? So, for example, like, I write a blog 5 days a week, and so that has to get out. It's a forward-facing thing. And now I happen to be a week ahead of that because, like, I like to write, but the getting in the habit of a daily writing thing, there's things that you eventually learn. There's things that you do that you don't have to procrastinate, and you just have to figure out what those are. Like, everybody has a set of things that they wait till the last minute. There's things that they do as soon as they have opportunity to do it, and there are things that they just do on a regular schedule. Like, you just have to recognize that you are a person that's capable of doing all those different categories, and then start to say, well, like, how can I just make this a routine? Some things are nice, like a cold plunge. I don't have to do anything except for get in the tub every morning. That's been a life changer for me in this last month or so. It's like, I don't have to do anything except for sit there with a 2-minute timer. And then there's a change that happens in my body afterwards. Jiu-jitsu. I just have to show up. And by the time I show up, if someone else is going to take my body through a whole series of stuff, all I have to do is respond, like, that makes it easy. So doing those kind of things can make it better. And having, like, social support, if you're really bad and you really want to change, having social support, having a dialogue, but also realize that, like, at the end of the day, if you get shit done, you get shit done. It's like the judgment doesn't help. And if you want to start earlier, set a deadline for earlier. So let's say you want to get this thing done. You have to have a first draft. Say, hey, Max, I got this first draft. I I want to get this to you by Friday. So you see how you're just making arbitrary deadlines. You just change what those are. And, you know, the other thing is like, what would be the benefit of getting that thing done a few days earlier? Because when you procrastinate, it's fresh in your brain. Like when I do a presentation, the reason I wait to the last minute, it's fresh in my brain. I have to think about it right before I go, and then it's good. If I make something, and I wrote the blog articles last week, I kind of forgot a little bit of those things. So I intentionally waited to the last minute to make that so that it was fresh in my brain to think about. So there's always a working mechanism behind everything. And if you judge yourself through someone else's lens, it's not serving you well. So the point is, hey, this works for me, and there's probably 4 reasons why. Now, there might be reasons I might change, but if I want to think about those, like, okay. But understand that there's always a pros and cons to every change you would make. And the second thing, when I'm working with clients, is not the prompting, it's really the asking. It's like, well, why do you do that? So I would sit here and ask you, you know, like I would ask you about the last time you did that. And I'd say, well, what were you doing? You know, what's the benefit? Why change? And then I'll let you figure that out. And I'd say, well, you know, like, did it work for you? And you just get to very, 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 like you look at a kid, for example, the kid wants their iPad and they're going to throw a temper tantrum and they may do it 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is, or they hold their breath and they get the iPad. Does the kid care, or does the dog care that they acted poorly and didn't know? They care that they got the thing. So if you look at things, you strip all the story and subjective thing we tell around it and just say, what was the very clear objective binary output? Did they get what they wanted? Well, if they did, then you just taught them a better way to get it. So that's where I look at the coaching is I'm not necessarily prompting them. Just ask the most very, like, did you like it? Did you not like it? Do you want that? Do you not want that? Did it work out? Did it not work out? What hurt? Like, just figure out what are the pains and what are the reasons around that. I think that's very helpful if you can be very, very pragmatic and very objective with your questioning.
I like that. Thank you. That helps.
Dylan, you got anything?
How do you have a successful and productive trip as opposed to one that's just for fun?
I'm assuming you mean mushroom trips.
Yes, psychedelics.
Bobby Marcus posted this. That is the most profound way I've thought about it. Is if you think about everything as part of your ceremony, then you never have a unsuccessful trip. Meaning everything that you like, and so this partly takes a little bit of this, like, you know, because it's funny, people like, oh, everything happens for a reason is like the exact thing that means that there's no free will. Like, so you have to kind of sit in the middle and say, like, I have the intention to be able to put my, like, so I think the free will was taking the mushrooms. I took it, I put myself in a situation, and now I'm here. I like in this moment, I'm surrendering to everything that is. I have free will to just orient myself forward, but in this moment, I'm reacting to who I was. I am reacting to who I chose to be. Like, that's the difference. So when you look at a mushroom trip, every single thing is part of the ceremony. Someone rings the door. Oh, it's me learning how to deal with it, whatever it is. It's like and so when you realize it's part of it, it's okay. This is supposed to happen. You don't freak out about it. And so then you also realize, like, the fact that there's a binary between just for fun and successful trip is a very, like, that's part of the problem in a sense. It's like, you know, part of the things Mac's trying to do is have more fun and relax. And so the people we want to be around, the people that are the most fun, the most, like, you know, they make us feel good in a sense. And so when we think about ourselves as important adults and have bigger problems and we have to go, we're you know, we've got a lot of stuff to do. We take ourselves too importantly. That's when we run into problems, because then the whole thing laughs at us. It's like, you're just a little pure person, here today, gone tomorrow. We insignificant in the meaning grand scheme of life. You know, we're like an ant in a colony. Maybe not that crazy. I don't know. But like, that's one of the spectrum. It's like, we're just on a little dust cloud floating through the world. But the point is, like, if you take yourself too seriously and you feel like every time you go into those, it's like overwhelming, it's because you take yourself too seriously. But when you look at everything, the positive, the negative emotions, the random events that happen, the things you notice, things you don't notice as part of the ceremony, you just open yourself to what is, and then you have a very different perspective and experience with that. Does that make sense?
It's more of observing yourself instead of having to, like, be like, okay, I'm doing a trip, I need to overcome this negative emotion.
Yes, okay. Because the overcoming literally could be as quick as like, let it go. It's like, that's like saying I'm existing and I'm going to overcome this rain cloud above me. It's like, well, I could go and drive and get away from the rain cloud and then realize that I'm going in the direction of the wind and have all this problem and like trying to get away from it. Or I could realize above that cloud is always sunshine. I could just be in the rain cloud and it doesn't affect my capacity to be in the sun as well. Like that makes sense. It's like just seeing that everything you experience as this essence of you is a passing thing. That but above that essence is the greater thing you say you want, which is like the sense of self-connectedness. Like the sense of you is always there. You might have different clouds of emotions and experiences coming through, but that doesn't mean that the sun isn't still shining. When you see that, you then are able to sit with and accept the momentary things that pass through your life without allowing them to be something you A, identify with, or B, over allowed to define you, so to speak. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think so.
He said, it's really think about this. It's everything is part of the ceremony. When you think about things that these are not part of the ceremony, they're bad thoughts. These are bad things. These are problems I want to get rid of. These are things that can't happen. Then that creates a wall. That creates fear. That fear is something that when you're on a mushroom trip or any type of trip, you feel less. You don't have your normal facultative defense mechanisms around you. So I can't go look at my phone and stay busy. I can't go and work out. I'm just like, I'm kind of here in a sense. I've like, in jujitsu, for example, one of the things is like, I'm going like if I go, I'm on a mat with another person, everything is on limits. There's like rules and stuff you can't do. But like the point is that I'm in this setting, in this circumstance. And so I'm going to go with movement and flow. I'm not going to say, well, I'm going to move every direction but left. Like that's how silly it would be. It's like, I'm going to roll jujitsu and I'm going to do everything, but I'm not going to move left. Why? It's like, that's an arbitrary thing. And then it creates a problem where like, now I won't do that. And it's fear. And then I end up getting hurt. As opposed to saying, I'm here wherever this thing goes. I'm working with someone else that has their own intention, right? So in jujitsu, it's almost like there's a submission when you go on a mat that like, you're going to roll, you're going to move, you're going to have to like navigate to things that you didn't necessarily dictate or control, but in the ability to sit with that and allow that to change and to take you, like right, surfing or doing anything that is like a bigger than you task. That is where you start to open up and access different parts of your body and learn things because it stretches you outside of your comfort zone, but it takes a submission on the front end. So it's not just like, I think to answer your more pragmatic question and the way I would think about it is the things you consume in the 2 weeks leading up to a trip really dictate everything you think about: the music, the words, the books you read, the movies you watch. So if you want to have something and you don't want to just go in for fun, then find a thinker, find a podcast, find an account, whatever it is, and isolate what you consume for the week or two leading up to it. And then like, I'm talking your food as well. Like don't eat a bunch of shit food, like especially in the 3 to 5 days, ahead of time. Treat yourself like you're training for something. It doesn't mean you have to take it really seriously because once you get there in the submission time, you're relaxed. You just, all right, I'm open to whatever. Everything is part of the ceremony. But also consider the fact that like the stuff you consume on the front end, the music you listen to, the books you read, the thinkers you contemplate, those will form the majority of the milieu of your experience. And within that, there's also a level of like the stuff that you're probably avoiding is going to come up. And so just allow it to be there. Observe what comes up and just like, don't judge. I know it's very nebulous, but like anything more specific and prescriptive is no longer valuable for you.
Gotcha.
You're
kind of, are you just trying to accept kind of the noise that's going on in your mind, or
if that's where you're at? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like for my first trips, it was like really one of the most profound things I recognized was like, oh, this is what it feels like to not have that like constant negative internal anxious dialogue going on.
Yes.
Wow. And then like once you take that, I think I do a trip and like once a quarter-ish, and then you give yourself 3 to 6 months to really let that stuff sink in. And I don't think people think about it like that. They're like, oh, I got a trip. Now I learned it all. Like, no, you got a glimpse of it. Now you have to go live it. And then sometimes it takes years to sink in. But there's a level of like, once I had that awareness of like, oh, all this chatter, that's not necessary. And then you can just sit with that. And you realize like, oh, and then you get a better iteration. It just kind of like helps you go there. But it's like, I don't have to feel anxious right now. I don't have to do anything right now. And there's a level of like letting go of that because you have a lived experience, so to speak, that can dictate, you can pull back to as a memory. And if that's the lesson you're going to learn, the other thing to remember is that you will not move past the lesson you have to learn until you learn it. So it doesn't matter how hard you want to try. If the point is, if you think you're trying hard to learn a lesson, you're obviously doing the exact opposite. That you're missing the point. And so there's something, it's almost always the most sometimes it's the most obvious thing to do, but in the sense it's the most counterintuitive. Oh, like for example, if I want to make more money, I have to do less. That seems weird. If I want to help people, say if I was sell people, I have to talk less and use less words. That seems counterintuitive. But there's a lesson I'm learning, which is the essence is what matters. And paying attention to people and meeting them where they're at, as opposed to trying to shift where that's at and to dictate their story, that's something I'm going through. So hopefully that makes sense.
I'll meditate on it. Thank you.
Perfect.
Awesome. I think I'd like to let you go, Graham. That was awesome. I appreciate it. Definitely learned a lot. Might have to sit down and process it as well. Listen back. But unless anyone has last questions, I think we'll let Graham go. And the next call is in. Oh, Garrett's got one. Oh, you're clapping. Never mind.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I will say,
yeah.
I just as a prologue or epilogue, I should say, I know that was an unfulfilling presentation relative to the tangible steps that people want. And I think that's part of it, which is like, if I walk, the good presentation people have is like, oh, I'm going to get up and do my 5-minute chant and breathe like this. They want prescriptive, specific steps that tell them what to do. But those aren't how life happens. Those are short-term motivations. If I go up and do this thing, sometimes it is good. We build our life off of tangible things, but you define that. The point is like, there's a bit of this is a very broad nebulous, like here's a different way of thinking about it. It's a conceptual frame. And within that, there's a way of now applying is a principle that you can now apply specific to your life. And someone else will do that, but those are the ones that, so if it feels unfulfilling, that's why. But it's probably the more valuable things in life are unfulfilling at first, but they create a conceptual lens that give you more freedom later on.
Well, you filled me up. My glass is empty, but I mean, I think the presentation was great, and I still got to work on my humor. So we'll see you guys.
Coming out of your shell, it's fun to watch you.
In 50 minutes, we have Zach Mobius on.